Well, welcome back to Neighboring. Neighboring is NeighborLink's podcast where we attempt to answer the question what it means to be a good neighbor. And also a second question that we're trying to ask this year is what makes healthy neighborhoods healthy? This idea of there are some unique things about our neighborhoods that are existing, and we're sitting down with 5 different neighborhood associations in Fort Wayne and actually doing a more comprehensive research project on this kind of question where we're combining quantitative data, looking at socioeconomics of a neighborhood and areas of town, and then doing a lot of qualitative data, sitting down with neighborhood associations to really ask the question and get to hear from them what they think makes a neighborhood healthy. For those that are unfamiliar with NeighborLink, we created a web platform 15 years ago, really as a way to connect vulnerable neighbors that are falling through the cracks of social services with other neighbors or civically minded groups like churches, businesses that are looking for volunteerism opportunities. So in it, practically, if there's a senior citizen who has been living in their home for 20, 30 years and can live independently but struggles with mowing their grass, we're trying to help volunteers or other neighbors to get to connect with them. Social connectivity in neighborhoods is harder than ever, but we hope to illustrate in 5 neighborhoods where social connectivity is kind of a core priority. So we are sitting here today with 2 neighbors and members of the leadership team in Williams Woodland Park neighborhood here in South Central Fort Wayne, Lyndsay and Charlie. Welcome to Neighboring.
Thank you.
Howdy. I'd love for you guys to start by introducing yourselves individually and then roughly how you got connected to Williams Woodland and how you got involved and started in the neighborhood association.
Okay.
Who wants to start?
I can kick it off.
All right.
So let's see, we moved in 2012, I think in March, so we're coming up on our 7-year anniversary. My hubby and I, we started just by biking around the area. Raul's mom lived on Hoagland, and we loved to bike through Williams Woodland mainly because of the architecture and all the tree canopy and the bright colors, and I don't know, it was just an awesome place. It was easy to connect from there to other bike paths and Foster Park and whatnot, and we just happened to roll by this house one day and sat on it for about 6 months. The housing market was a lot different then, and finally we were debating renting, and it was so affordable at that time that we decided to just jump in and take on a historic home that needed a lot of help, and that took a few years to do. After we kind of wrapped that up is when we really started to get involved in the neighborhood. And I can just distinctly remember working outside one day on the house, and there were 2 neighbors that walked by that are great friends of ours now. And I remember thinking, that dress, that's at Target. Like, I know we would get along because she shops at Target.
People together.
Yes. And we struck up a conversation on that, and she was headed to the neighborhood meeting at that time. And so I'm like, you know what, I'll tag along next month with you. And that's how we really started getting involved, and from there it was just attending meetings and going to social events and eventually joining the board, and I just finished up a role as president onto treasurer now. So
That's great.
That's awesome.
My history, I guess, isn't too dissimilar. The wife and I were renting a house in the Nebraska neighborhood, if you're familiar with that, just south of North Highlands, actually. And we actually knew some people, Dry and Brandy, who lived in Williams Woodland, and a house came up for rent, and we looked at it, and Nancy, my wife, was like, oh my God, we have to rent this place. This house is gorgeous. I'm like, sure, I like it. I like architecture. Let's do it. And then we moved in, and the more we lived there, the more we'd meet our neighbors. We'd go on walks, and we'd run into somebody, and you'd have like a half-hour conversation on a walk. And, the more we lived, the more I'm like, this is a cool neighborhood. I like this neighborhood. I like actually talking to my neighbors, which is something you don't get in every neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And so we rented for about 3 years, and then we decided to buy a house in the neighborhood, which eventually takes time to buy a house. Eventually we did. Just, like Lyndsay did, we wound up fixing it up, updating it, getting a little more modern, so that was kind of a fun project. But right around the time that we were doing that, I was talking to Lyndsay, actually, and she's like, you should be secretary or whatever you offered me. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'm interested, I'll do it. and this got sucked in, and now here 2 years later, I'm trading her for president's
pass
role.
the baton.
And the role of social influence. We got dresses, we got walks, all these kind of things. Well, that's great. In full disclosure, I'm a member of Williams Woodland. My wife and I moved in 2009, 2010, somewhere around there. It's hard to believe that we've been there over a decade ourselves and had similar connections. What have you, paint a picture for the audience of, Williams Woodland?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Williams Woodland. I had a friend that lived down there, so all you cool kids are, in the hip club, but I'm like, is it the neighborhood I'm thinking of? So, yeah, if for someone like me and an audience member who's listening in who might not understand, paint a picture. I mean, I'm picking up that there's lots of walking around, there's beautiful architecture, but where is it? What are the boundaries? And just give me a little more insight of this neighborhood.
I always describe it whenever people are like, where do you live? I'm like, I'm 1 mile directly south of the ballpark, right? The Parkview Field is a huge landmark. Everybody knows where it is. So that kind of gives them an idea. And then we're bounded by the streets, Creighton, Calhoun, Pontiac, and Fairfield. So we actually have some pretty cool stuff on the corners of our neighborhood, like the Boys and Girls Club is on one corner. The Fairfield Manor is on another corner. The old Rialto is on another corner. So we have a lot of cool landmarks there to anchor us.
And the other corner, of course, is the great taco shop, Mi Tierra. So
yeah,
we have awesome corners.
Yeah.
So what, in your neighborhood, are there any local businesses or something nearby that?
Inside the core of the neighborhood, we're pretty much purely residential.
Yeah, just to give a little background of the history of the area, it was originally a park when it was built back in the turn of the century, the 20th century. So what we benefit from that is a ton of huge mature trees and some bigger lots especially the outside of the neighborhood. And that's what I think what makes it so beautiful, because you have great springs and great falls especially. But then of course you have a lot of turn of the century architecture. A lot of the residents who first lived in the neighborhood were high society of the day. So a lot of the homes are a lot more opulent and just fancy inside, and they've gone through different periods of, up and down in terms of economic people that are in that neighborhood. But it's just been great to kind of see this elevation of the homes in the last, I would say maybe 30 years, I guess, is what I hear, when the neighborhood started kind of really turning around and people starting to put a lot more time and effort into restoring the architecture.
Man, you guys got me I want to go see it now. When's your guys' home tour? When can I see? Do you guys?
It's always the first full weekend of December.
December 7th and 8th this year. We let everybody who purchases a ticket get a chance to tour usually about 7 to 8 homes and a couple apartments in Fairfield Manor, which Charlie mentioned. So you can not only get to experience the outside of the home, but you get to see the really cool features inside.
And most every year there's at least one home that's in the process of a heavy remodel, which people love to see because you see gutted walls. And
then you come back the next year and see the after. So
right, yeah.
if you like HGTV, you will like the summer.
Yeah, some of the other unique features, I think, of our neighborhood, there's not many homes under probably 1,800 square foot, a lot of traditional four squares. Most everything was built really early 1900s. What's probably one of the latest homes that was built in the neighborhood. There are a few that kind of were filled in.
A couple more 1950. That's 50, really atypical, because there's that one that just went for auction at Little White House.
I wonder though if that was, like you said, a fill and maybe a house burned down or something.
Yeah. But most of them are around 1910, 1920.
Right. One of the other real characteristics that I think is unique to Williams Woodland as we think in four-way neighborhoods is it's relatively small. We've given that geography, and
it's
if you're not real familiar,
1 mile lap around.
Okay.
I like to take dog and run a lap.
Which is really small and really unique when in terms of a true neighborhood boundary. Most other neighborhoods have a much bigger footprint.
Yeah. Especially if you compare it to large cities where a neighborhood would be thousands of homes, and we're no, we're 200 homes.
Yeah. Which makes it really unique. Sometimes it feels like we're this little island in the middle of South Central.
Cult, I've heard.
Well, yeah, I guess.
Used in a good way. I mean, they're
a good cult, not a bad one.
We're not a cult. We're closely knit. We're
closely knit. Yes, that's a benefit of having 200 homes. Is I bet you I could tell you everybody's spouse, child, and dog name for 90% of the homes in the neighborhood.
That's impressive.
And I don't think you're going to find that in a lot of places.
Wow.
There's some
I
natural
think you're
boundaries.
right. Wow. Dang.
Yeah, with that, so I would say, Lyndsay, you kind of talked about this, like, when did the neighborhoods really start shifting and turning? When we moved in, it was so great to meet other people. My wife and I know we moved in very intentionally. Like, we were looking around and joined another family, and we moved into that neighborhood like very distinctly. And what was so great is we got to meet several others, families that had, been 15 years before us, and now, have been there 30, 35 years. We learned that there was a resurgence 30, 35 years ago, where some other neighbors really intentionally moving in. Describe what's really kind of happened in Williamswood in the last maybe 30 years, if you have any more context for that, but also what kind of development we've kind of seen in the last 15 years.
I guess the way I would describe it is, like you maybe start from the beginning. The neighborhood was built around 1900. Like, my house is from the late 1890s, so that's kind of the beginning of the building in that neighborhood. And it seemed like most of the houses were finally developed in 1910, 1920s. And then I call it old suburbia. Like, this is where all the rich people left the city and moved to the big houses. And then, for reasons I don't understand, in like the 1950s, it seemed like that's when there was a shift in the neighborhood, and it started becoming more of a rental area. A lot of houses were split up into duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, whatever, starting in like the 1950s. And that kind of defined the neighborhood until the 80s. When did we get our historic designation?
I don't know the exact year, but it was right around that 30 year ago time, and that was, I think, one of the reasons that we were able to see that resurgence, that gave people a common goal to unite around. It kept homes from being further split and maintaining their exterior architecture for sure.
The historic designation and the rezoning of the core of the neighborhood was rezoned to R1, right, to kind of discourage splitting up houses again. Of course, all the existing ones are grandfathered in, so many of them are still there. But that was, the 80s is when a shift happened, and all the neighbors that we still talk to today were part of that.
I've heard then also, it must be not quite so long. This is more about 15 years ago now. I've heard that the way that the association really took off and we started seeing a lot of participation was not because people were going to hear the treasurer's report and how much money was in the bank and whatnot. It was because they had a dinner together and all the neighbors were invited to this potluck dinner. And then the theme of the dinner was, hey, what do we want to do? What are our dreams? What are our goals? What do we want to unite around? How do we want to interact with each other? And that allowed them to start forging a relationship beyond just business.
So as I'm listening to this, I'm hearing something pretty unique. So I see young faces, and I'm curious, when you moved in, like, who was in charge then, and where did they go? Or are they still around? Has there been like a, like, what are you doing in my neighborhood, or everyone's welcome? Like, what's the culture around that? Like, I mean, it seems like a pretty youthful neighborhood. Like, kind of paint a picture for me in that.
Never ever have I felt anybody's like, you're not part of this or something. I've always felt welcomed, and the great thing that you're kind of touching on is there is definitely young single people, young families, people whose children are high school age, retirees, etc. We have this awesome spread of people, and everyone connects and gets together in one way or another. So I don't think we have this kind of division that maybe other people experience. Yeah, and it's great because I'll give you one example. There's a single retired woman, and she works with a young family, or maybe more than one family neighborhood, takes care of their children, and those two neighbors can interact and kind of codepend on each other for different things. And so it's great to have that diversity of ages and experience.
That's extremely unique. So if I were a parent, like someone new to Fort Wayne, and I, were a parent, had a few kids, what would you guys say to me? Should I move into Williams Woodland?
I would say absolutely.
Yeah.
Remember the first neighborhood picnic I went to, I was like, there's like 30 kids here, and they're all from the neighborhood, and they're like some, little tiny babies to like high schoolers, and they're just running around having fun, and there's 30 kids at the neighborhood picnic. And I'm like, if you want your kids to hang out and play around with the neighbors, this is absolutely a neighborhood for you.
Yeah, and do the kids kind of like ride around on their bikes, or like without like parents watching?
Yes, and the awesome thing not that parents aren't watching, but I know that I don't have kids, and I'm like constantly watching, like, oh, there goes so and so. I make sure she gets to the corrals in the corner because that's, you know, I know where she's going, and so I feel like there's that sense of other people looking out for other people. I want to comment though, when I grew up, I lived on the north side of the town, outside of the city. We didn't have any neighbors. There was no neighborhood association, and it was so lonely. I was an only child for a long time, and I remember begging my parents, can we please move in an addition? Can we please move in an addition? I didn't have a lot of people to play with, and then in high school, most of my friends lived in Arlington Park, and I just loved to hang out over there because you could run around to 4 of your friends' houses in one afternoon. And I am so envious of those kids now that can just, you know, knock on the next door neighbor's door and they have an instant playmate or person to hang out with. And the same for adults too, because I know that happens a lot as well. So we're really very fortunate.
Unique. Wow.
I used to live, when I was a real little kid, like preschool, we lived on Home Avenue, which is only about a mile from Williams Woodland. I remember living there, it was kind of the same thing as Williams Woodland. There's neighborhood kids. You're just running around with the neighborhood kids, and that's what you did. But come around first grade, we moved to the Georgetown area of town, northeast, and it was totally different. It was like kids didn't play outside. Like, you didn't talk to your neighbors. Like, you didn't get any of that. It was... a friend of mine, I kind of like the way he described it. He's like, Northeast Fort Wayne is like a cultural dead zone. There's everybody's busy, but nothing's going on. It's this weird dynamic. But then you come to this area of town, and like you talk to your neighbors and you hang out with your neighbors, and your kids, you know, run around the streets together, and there's always something fun going on, whether it's a race coming through the neighborhood or a new restaurant opening or whatever it might be.
So let me just ask you, what do you feel, you know, because some people are totally fine with like a cultural dead zone. Okay, fine. I mean, I'm just trying to live. But yeah, tell me, why do you think it's important, you know, for whether you're a parent or you're a married couple or single, why do you feel that that's really something to treasure or cherish, to have that in your neighborhood? Because can't you just drive 10 minutes and go get that, you know? I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Sure. So I guess it kind of gets to one of the themes that you're going to get at, what makes a healthy neighborhood. And I think when you talk to your neighbors, that's kind of the core requirement of a healthy neighborhood. Like, if you don't talk to your neighbors, if you don't know them, if you're not in a position where you can just knock on your neighbor's door and get help for something, it could be anything. Like, hey, can you help me carry a new fridge into the house, or something more serious like my plumbing's busted, can you help me? Like, if you can't approach your neighbors and already know their names, I think that I don't know, it's not healthy for a neighborhood to be in that position. And I'm not saying that like the northeast area of town is full of terrible people or anything. I'm just saying like that dynamic isn't prevalent.
Yeah.
Right?
That song comes to mind. Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky.
I think about that all the time.
So that's not your neighborhood, right? That's not your theme song?
Every house is different. Every time I go into somebody's house, I want to move to that house. Like, there's nothing the same. And I want to touch on one thing here, though, about why it's important to have different, what we would call not a cultural dead zone, and that's the topic of diversity. Because I think in our neighborhood, walking, you can get to see different kind of people in 5 minutes just by walking out of your front door. And I don't know for other parts of town because I don't live there, but I feel very fortunate that we do have that opportunity to coexist with people that aren't the same with us. And I think that is important for the healthiness of a person in general, just to expand their viewpoint.
Well, think about like the corners of our neighborhood. On one corner you have the taqueria, right? Mm-hmm. So you get Mexican influences there, and you go just a few blocks south of it, and you get the Thai restaurant right next to an Asian grocery store, and you're just a few blocks away. I go to the other corner of the neighborhood, and you're at the Boys and Girls Club, which has all kinds of people there, right? And so just the corners of our neighborhood reflect the diversity.
Sure.
That's so weird.
Plus great food. I mean.
Yeah, plus great food. Yeah.
That's a real important thing.
Yeah, I find I'm always going to Don Chavez because it's right down the street, and I'm like, man, it's probably a really good thing that I don't have a bunch of restaurants so close, because there's so many nights you're like, oh yes, there's groceries in the fridge, but it would just take me 20 minutes to go and sit down. So yeah, like you guys, you can't help but be like, I mean, I should probably support local business. I mean, I didn't want to eat out tonight, but it's just right down the street, so you can talk yourself into it.
Sure you did. Sure you did. What is like one of the areas that we touch on, and I think is an important part. What is the percentage, at least in your mind, between renter and owner?
Oh, we had that number at one point. It was 40-50% at one point.
At one point,
I think it's dipping a little bit. A couple homes have been converted from either unoccupied to now occupied single family, or from multiplex to single family. Most of the zoning of the neighborhood kind of encourages that direction of flow, but we still have 40% rentals, I bet.
40% rental.
Right. And it skews some of it because like one house might have 5 apartments.
Sure.
Right? So
One of the unique things we talked about yesterday, or the last time we did a neighboring podcast with West Central, was they made a really unique distinction about so often renters versus ownership, because of the control of real estate and ownership, nature. That number comes into play or gets talked about a lot. They made a really unique distinction, and I wonder what you guys think about this in terms of the type of landlord, between being an absentee landlord and a neighbor that happens to own several properties and is actively involved in the neighborhood. Is there a difference? Do you see that in Williams Woodland?
well, certainly, I'd say we have 3 kinds of landlords. We have out-of-state landlords who you can't get any, or sometimes it's out of city even, and they're just absentee. You can't get anything out of them. The only thing they're interested in is putting another renter back in, and they leave. But then you have other landlords that are not in the neighborhood but closer. Usually they're like property management firms. You get various quality with that. Usually we would say it trends towards lower quality. I would say they're slightly better than out-of-state landlords, though, because you can actually call them. They have an office, right?
In terms of maintaining the house is what I want to clarify. Obviously being a landlord is a business, so I think the person that is the landlord walks a fine line of maintaining their property and making their money. So unfortunately, I think that sometimes contributes to the detriment of the home or the neighborhood, and that's been the challenge, is trying to engage people to see the value in putting more money into that property.
And that's the third landlord, is the in-neighborhood landlord, because we have a few of those, and it's their neighborhood. They care in a way that's not necessarily monetary, so they're much more willing to do those investments.
So diving into what makes neighborhoods healthy, what do you guys, besides some of the other things, what are some other things in Williams Woodland that you would kind of say makes for a healthy neighborhood?
Walkability, front porches. If you are driving into a garage every day and you're closing the door and walking into your house and you never see anybody, I don't understand how you could even make the connection with those people across the street.
When we were shopping for a house, I'm like, the only requirement I had was front porch. It was a big front porch. I wanted it to face east, because then most of the weather travels over you, so you can sit out in the front porch during a storm. Yeah. Like, that was it. I'm like, well, Nancy, you can pick the other requirements. This is all I really want.
That's very, Indian. Like, you must sleep at night facing the east, or probably have the wrong direction. But
have you ever sat on a front porch while the weather passes over you during a storm? It's
my
nice.
porch faces north.
Well, we'll invite you to Charlie's porch so you can
I get blasted. I'm like, Bobby inside. I have a big picture window, so I'm like, okay, this is cool. This is nice.
Other things I think, though, would be a social aspect. So getting together to share food or drinks or play games. Big ones for us are picnics and the Fort for Fitness. We throw a whole street party then, which has helped to reach out to other parts of the community and kind of let them know what we're about, I think. Just getting a chance to know who the people are that live around you. And it's been so amazing that we kind of all have just lots of things that connect us, the common threads. And that was never intentional, to live amongst people that are similar to me in that way. But gosh, it's been really nice to know that most of my friends are actually neighbors. And man, I don't know a lot of people that can say that.
That's been true for Michelle and I. Like, I think if we look at like our closest friends over the last 10 or 11 years that consume, like, it's such a refreshing, it's such a refreshing thing that we didn't necessarily move in thinking like, we can't wait to make best friends. But the fact that has been a huge benefit, it ranks really high for us. Like, the same of like knowing your neighbors in a way that allow you to send your kids across the street to the other parents when something comes up. Like, last year I was out on a bike ride 10 miles from home, and I get a call and, hey, how far are you away from home? Can you come home? I'm like, well, I'm like 30 minutes away. Like, well, one of the kids threw a Hot Wheel and it went through, like, poked a hole in the other one's mouth, and I need to take him to the emergency room. And, well, can you just go across the street? Can you, like, tell Carrie, our neighbor, that I'll be back as soon as I can? Can she just watch him and play in the yard for like 20 minutes? Well, yeah, sure. And so that was the solution. And
Did that really happen?
yeah, that really happened. I have twin boys.
What kind of Hot Wheel
I
contest?
have twin boys. They
Point
were
out.
playing in the yard and found like this like gas this like tanker truck that had like smokestacks, and one decided to chuck it
Hot
across the
Wheels.
yard, and the little smokestack went through and poked a hole in his lip. So.
You should just put a little like lip ring in there and then like send him off to high school. No big deal. Just kidding. I'm not a doctor. Don't take any advice.
But it's the idea that you can do that last minute. You don't have to
Yeah.
plan it with them. You trust your neighbors well enough, and you think they trust you well enough that you can just kind of handle it like that on the fly.
Yeah. And one of the misconceptions I often think in terms of neighborhoods and associations when we talk about relational connectivity or social connectivity among neighbors is that there's this perception of like, if we get to know our neighbors, that means we have to be best friends with everyone. Like the process when we try to give, you should know your neighbors' names and you should get to know them. And it's like, well, there's a fear because I'm like, I don't know, what if we don't connect, or do we have to connect? And it's like, well, no, you don't really have to. That's kind of not the point. It's there's so much power in just getting to know the names and being on a first name basis and exchanging some information. You don't have to hang out once a week. Like if you do, that's great. But there's something to be said about the very fact of just getting to know your neighbors, exchanging informations, being able to, instead of waving when you pass each other, you're like, hi, Carrie, or hi, Mr. Smith, or whatever it is, but you have that first name basis, and those are some small things that really connect and make a huge difference. So when we talk about like relational connectivity, often we're trying to like, okay, you don't have to be best friends with all of your neighbors. That's not necessarily the point, but there's a huge benefit from just being connected.
And it's not just like social cohesion and like social well-being. There's aspects of like security involved in that. Like if you know your neighbor, you're more likely to tell them like, I'm going to be out of town this weekend. Call me if there's anything that goes wrong. If a tree falls in my house or somebody breaks in, we know each other, so you can just call me and let me know.
And it
if
makes
something
you a little
happened.
less scared too, because I feel like I'll be honest, there was like a point, because I was just gone last week, and I'm like, I don't want my neighbor to know that I'm, like, there's one neighbor, I'm like, I don't want them to know that I'm gone, because what if they break into my house? So it's like, but I haven't really created a relationship with them enough, so I'm just throwing myself out here, I'm being candid, and I was like, yeah, I should probably get to know them better, because at this point, I'm just being cautious. And so I made sure, like, my Facebook statuses, they couldn't, I'm like, I can't live like this. And then I'm going to go and sit on neighboring with everybody. So you guys, it's healthy to hear, because sometimes I wonder, like, when anthropology 101, one of the first things you learn is like, if you don't know another culture or another person, you can't help but just kind of project. It's easy to monstrosize something. Well, maybe I should be a little cautious of it. Or maybe, I don't know those people over there. The minute that they become human, you can start being human together and alongside each other. And I think, listening to these stories is really helpful, because not only does it keep your mind in check and keep you from doing that, but also there's the aspect of, listening to these stories, it's really inspiring, and I would prefer that over, I find myself like, okay, we got to put the Halloween decorations up, like, oh man, we only have 20 minutes to do it, and so-and-so's talking to us, and, but it's like, to burst that bubble of, I'm on a time, how you're saying everybody's busy, but nothing's going on, like, you don't want that, like, I don't personally want that, like, take, maybe 15 of those 20 minutes gets chewed up, but you're going to find time elsewhere. And what's going to come out of it in the end is far more fruitful and way cooler than you getting your Halloween decorations up in a timely manner. I mean, and I think that's, I'm always open to my family stopping by. So what's the difference between a neighbor, somebody who's living next door to my family? or a few blocks down the street from my family, like, where do we draw the lines? Like, family, yes, stop by anytime. Neighbor, okay, you have 3 minutes to talk. That's not cool. Like, I'm just, being human here. And I wonder if anybody else listening is like, okay, I kind of like this idea of, like, Williams Woodland, but, like, tell me more, guys. So you're talking me right into it. I'm not proud of this. Yes.
And there are some neighbors who will talk your ear off, too. So if you love that, you can totally get that in Williams Woodland.
And there's also great listeners, which that's me. I'm not a talker, so we have a good combination.
Well, that's cool. I mean, I feel like you guys you're so advanced in this, this little pocket of culture that you have going, that you've found ways, like you've said, of like, boundaries are created. Like, you don't need to, I need to spend 30 minutes every single time with Mr. Charlie down the street. But it's like, you have to learn how to, just like with family, just like with coworkers, you have to learn how to draw those boundaries of, you know what, I love your stories, but I gotta get going. Or, it's okay. You can share, just knowing when and where. I feel like you guys are learning how to deeply navigate these things. It's really, really unique.
And we're always looking for new neighbors to be part of that. We've actually moved 2 or 3 families into the neighborhood that were specifically looking for a home, because sometimes we have the inside track on houses that are vacant. Or
I bet you've converted so many people to, like, they were gonna pull the, like, card that I would, like, kind of the me that I was just like, oh, they're gonna get me, like, and then sure enough, like, you just, like, throw enough kindness at them and they're like, okay, I guess I could wait. Okay, if you want to have tea with me. Yeah, I'm sure you've converted so many people.
We hope so.
Well, for that, some landlords work with us, and they'll specifically tell us if they expect a vacancy in one of their homes coming up. And sometimes we can find somebody to fill it, and they never even advertise it. Mm-hmm. Right? Landlords like that because usually they're already coming in with neighborhood support, so they're probably a decent neighbor. That's always the hard part of being a landlord, right? You want good tenants.
Yeah.
Man, you guys are so cool. Can I move in?
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
after I just shared that story of me
Which
being a butthead.
which house do you want to buy? Or actually, there's a duplex next door to me that's been up for rent upstairs.
You got
Downstairs neighbors are great.
The Porter family moves in. We're gonna rent for about a month until we find out. So that leads a good segue. What are some of the goals? What are some of maybe the problems that you guys are trying to address now, and or some of the goals and visions for the neighborhood, kind of in the next couple of years?
Well, this is something that I've been trying to formulate since I just got elected president, and was that February. So this is
Congratulations.
Everybody's starting to call me El Presidente now.
I had Madam President when
Yeah,
I was.
Madam President.
Must be a nickname thing.
But that's something that I'm starting to try to create a coherent vision around, and really it's just like, what have the people before me done? Like Lyndsay and Ed before her have done a phenomenal job bringing the neighborhood to where they are. And there's been other leaders. I don't want to leave anybody out. Those are just the presidents that I've interacted with. And so really it's continuing what we're doing. Like everything that Lyndsay's done is like, all right, this is great. Let's keep doing it and see if we can add a couple more things around the edges.
I think the structure's there. We just want to expand it.
So like right now we do an ice cream social in June, and we close off one of the residential roads, and it's like, well, instead of doing that, why don't we just host it at a church? That way you get the church more involved. So we're not really changing what we're doing, we're just changing where we're doing it to get more people.
Connecting with not just residents, but people that are in our neighborhood for other reasons, because we can do a better job of that. And that's one thing I'd like to see is, how could we get every neighbor to go to at least one thing? Like, how can we engage people that maybe aren't currently engaging? And that's not something that we'll solve overnight, but it's being cognizant that you need to think about what is interesting to other people or what need that they need fulfilled, and try to think about that and do that for them.
Yeah, I would say that the underrepresented group of the neighborhood is renters. Mm-hmm. It's hard to engage renters because the way they approach the home is just different because it's not their home per se, right? They don't own it. So I think it's harder to get them involved in neighborhood organization because, well, they might not be here in a year, right? They might move on. Because I rented for years, I get it. I loved renting at the time because I loved the flexibility, and then I didn't have to worry about major home repairs. I could leave in a year if I wanted to. I could leave Fort Wayne if I wanted to. I wasn't tied down. But, that's when we finally decided to buy the house. We're like, no, this neighborhood, this is it. We're done. We're moving in.
That's awesome.
So those that group would be awesome to engage. It's just, how do you attract them?
The other thing is, coming from a role where I was president, okay, there's a lot of work to do. You have got to be willing to volunteer a lot of your time, and that was fine. I wanted to serve in that way. But if we had all of the houses that are vacant and or occupied by renters also engaged, that would be a way to share the workload. And I think that in the end, you would get a better product at the end, because it's not all falling on a small group of people to grow and prosper the neighborhood. So it would be beneficial for the neighborhood to also reach out to those parties that maybe aren't participating at this time, and just make sure that they feel welcome and that their opinions and feelings are valued, and we want them there.
Yeah, it certainly takes a lot of work. That's one thing I've been aware of the neighborhood association. And Lyndsay's been put so much time, and now you get to, Charlie. It does. It takes.
Great job. You'll just be so good at it.
Well, every neighborhood that we talk to, there are people who put tireless hours into trying to do whatever they're trying to do. Big, small. It just takes a lot of energy. This is a good place to kind of transition. This has been a great conversation. To wrap up, we'd like to ask the question: what does it mean to be a good neighbor to each of you? Have you guys had a chance to think about that kind of question? Would love to hear each of you kind of your take on what do you think it means to be a good neighbor?
For me, I think it's making sure that I take care of myself and my family, my home, but I also need to be available to take care of others around me, and I take pleasure in that. I've answered a lot of calls and texts and requests for, hey, could you do this, or could we do this, or what's a way we could support so-and-so. And that is a way to be a good neighbor, is just showing somebody that you care about them, that you're willing to help them with any task that they need. You may not be the best at it, but gosh, I'll try to do what I can for you. And that's a way that I've made a lot of friends in the neighborhood.
That's so
I would say, yeah, to know their name and be willing to help. I mean, to me, that's everything. If you're not willing to help, then your relationship can never be healthy. You got to be willing to jump in and help the neighbor with anything and everything. A tree falls down, you help them clean it up. They're working on their car and they're missing a tool, and you have it. You let them borrow it, and always without the expectation of like money or anything like that.
Yeah.
You're just doing it because it's the right thing to do. And it's, you kind of hope the same thing happens back, but really you want to be helpful. That to me is what everything always boils down to.
That's excellent. Thank you.
We can't end this podcast yet without me asking
Lyndsay
my
has
favorite question.
has a
I
famous
will
question.
not be able to sleep at night.
Okay.
So, if you don't like superheroes, or it's not your thing, you can pass. But if you could have any superhero live in your neighborhood, who would it be and why?
Yeah, she gave this question before we came, and I've been pondering it. We have a lot of superheroes in our neighborhood, and
That's such a good answer.
okay, I was like, is that not acceptable? We really do. Okay, we don't need Superman or Batman or whatever. I'm not totally into comic books, so I don't know. But
My answer wouldn't be a superhero. Classically, it would be MacGyver. Because especially in an old neighborhood.
That is good.
And it's just like you said, we have a lot in our neighborhood. We already have MacGyver. His name's Pete. Right? And he's an engineer, and he will help engineer any kind of solution for you.
Oh, that's awesome.
So he's our MacGyver.
That's the perfect
So MacGyver, if you're listening, we need you away from it.
But not really, because there's already Pete. I mean...
Oh, it's true. It's true.
I think Pete would like a sidekick, so there you go.
Okay.
It's basically the idea that it's not just one person that keeps us going, and we don't need one person to protect us or make us better. Like, it is definitely a group effort, and it always will be.
Oh my goodness. That's enough.
Lyndsay, Charlie, thank you for all of your
Thanks, guys.
efforts. I
Thank
get
you.
to say, as a neighbor, thanks for all of the work that you guys are doing, and so glad to be a part of that and get to play a small part of it. And we love Williams Woodland, and so grateful for that. So we're really looking forward to getting this research project done to see what the other 5 neighborhoods have to say as well, and looking at this data to see how we can use the data and use the information to move forward and impact our neighborhoods. So thanks for tuning into this episode of Neighboring, where we asked Williams Woodland what it means to be a good neighbor and what makes their neighborhood healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.